Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're taking on a fun and creative project, giving new life to my mom's old closet door. It was in pretty bad shape, but we're going to transform it into something stunning using epoxy resin and mica powder. No paint, just pure resin art. Let's get started. First things first, we need to remove the door. It's important to work on a flat, stable surface to get the best results, so taking it off its hinges is step number one. Once the door was off, I took it outside to start prepping the surface. Here's a quick look at the door in its current state. My mom loves experimenting with new ideas, and she started a project on this door, but never got around to finishing it. The next step was to remove the aluminum edges of the door. The first one came off easily since it wasn't glued in place, but the second one was a bit more stubborn. It was glued down, and I ended up tearing up some wood in the process, but no big deal. The resin is going to smooth everything out and cover up any imperfections. After taking the hinges off, I moved straight into the sanding process. One time, while I was sanding a piece outdoors, a gust of wind blew all the fine dust straight into my face. I was wearing safety glasses, but I completely forgot about a mask. Let's just say I ended up tasting sawdust for the rest of the day and learned the hard way to gear up properly before sanding. Sanding is definitely a long process. I started off with 40 grit sandpaper to tackle the rough spots and remove any imperfections. Once that was done, I gradually worked my way up to 120 grit. Then, I flipped the door over and started the whole process again on the back side and the edges, making sure every surface was smooth and ready for the next step. The door handle was pretty wobbly, which was something I couldn't ignore. I noticed the hole where the handle attaches was slightly uneven and damaged, likely from years of wear and tear. To fix it, I brought out my trusty Dremel tool. I carefully used it to smooth out the edges of the hole and reshape it for a tighter, more secure fit. The precision of the Dremel made it easy to control, and after a few adjustments the handle was much more stable. We're now in my studio. I didn't film it, but before coming here, I applied plaster to the door. This was an important step to fill in every tiny hole and imperfection. The goal was to create a completely sealed surface to prevent any leaks when pouring the epoxy. Next, I painted the surface black. This step isn't strictly necessary, but I chose to do it as a precaution. When using enough mica powder, the surface should be completely covered, leaving no base color visible. However, if you happen to use less powder, some of the white surface might show through. By painting the base black, any exposed areas will blend seamlessly with the mica powder. With the door now painted, I'm placing it on a flat, stable surface to prepare for the resin pour. To prevent any resin from spilling over, I'm applying a few layers of duct tape around 3 of the edges. This will act as a makeshift mold, helping to contain the resin and ensuring it stays exactly where I want it. I'm also applying tape around the door handle. This will protect it from any resin overflow during the pour and make cleanup much easier later on. Before pouring the main resin layer, I'm applying a thin coat of fast-curing epoxy to the edges where I'm not entirely confident about the seal. I let it sit for about 2 hours before moving on to the main pour. Always remember to prioritize safety when working with epoxy resin. Wear a proper mask with the correct filter and make sure to change it regularly. The fumes from epoxy resin can be harmful and may cause severe health issues if inhaled over time. At this point, I realized I hadn't thought everything through before starting to mix the epoxy. I ended up using a bucket that was way too small for the amount of resin I needed, so I grabbed another bucket and mixed the rest in that. Everything seemed fine until disaster struck. One of the buckets tore apart mid-mix. Resin started spilling everywhere and I had to act fast to contain the mess. I quickly poured the resin into the second bucket I had, salvaging as much as possible. Then, I grabbed another bucket for the remaining mix. Unfortunately, what spilled onto the table was lost, as it wasn't properly mixed and could have compromised the entire batch. So I just grabbed an old tissue and removed as much resin as I could. Here, you can see me mixing the resin thoroughly to ensure the perfect consistency. Once that's done, I add the mica powder, carefully blending it in until it creates a beautiful, vibrant color. Finally, it's time for the most satisfying part, pouring the resin onto the door and watching the design come to life. Once the pour is completed, I'll use my hand to gently spread the resin across the surface. If the surface is properly leveled, the resin will naturally flow and spread out evenly, creating a perfectly flat and smooth finish on its own. This resin typically cures in about 24 hours, but to ensure it's fully set and achieves the best possible finish, I'm going to let it sit for 48 hours. The mica powder consists of tiny, shiny particles that naturally settle during the curing process. To create a unique texture, I've developed a technique where I use a pen to draw gentle circles in the resin. The result? A stunning crocodile effect that adds incredible depth and character to the piece. 12 hours later, you can carefully remove the tape while the resin is still slightly pliable but not fully cured. This helps ensure clean edges without cracking or chipping the resin. Once the tape is off, let the piece sit undisturbed for another 36 hours to fully cure. After that, it's time to move on to the sanding process. Gently sand the surface and the edges using 120 grit sandpaper. This step helps smooth out any imperfections and prepares the surface for the final finish. After sanding, I clean the surface thoroughly with a regular glass cleaner to remove any dust or residue. Once that's done, I flip the door to work on the other side, sanding it down to ensure it's smooth and even. Next, I apply a coat of white paint to the surface and sand it again once it's dry. This final sanding step helps achieve a perfectly smooth finish. Next, I apply masking tape to one edge of the door, then flip it over and apply masking tape to the other edge. This ensures clean, crisp lines while I paint the edges black. Once the edge is painted, it's time to varnish the door. To keep this project true to its DIY spirit, I decided to varnish it right here in my studio instead of using a professional cabin. If any dust does get into the varnish, you can always sand it down using grits from 1000 up to 3000, then polish it for a flawless finish. However, I'm personally skipping this step because this door is for my mom, and let's face it, scratches are bound to happen over time. If this were a client's project though, I'd absolutely take the extra steps to ensure a perfectly smooth, professional grade finish. Now let's attach the door handle, and here's the final result. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps me create more fun and creative projects like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.